Jack Nicholson's disappearance from Hollywood finally makes sense. He won 3 Oscars. He earned 12 nominations. He sat courtside at Lakers games with those dark sunglasses and that famous grin, and every camera in the building would somehow find its way to his face. For nearly 5 decades, Jack Nicholson was not just a movie star. He was a force of nature, the kind of man who walked into a room and made everything else smaller just by being there. Then one day, without a warning and without a single word of goodbye, he vanished. Not dead, not confirmed sick, just gone. Locked behind the gates of his home on Mulholland Drive while the world kept moving without him. For more than 15 years people have been asking the same question. What really happened to Jack Nicholson? Today, the answer finally makes sense. But to understand why he disappeared, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Because the story of Jack Nicholson does not start with Hollywood. It starts with a lie. A deep and carefully buried lie that shaped everything about who he became long before he ever stepped in front of a camera. Jack was born on April 22, 1937, in New York City. His family lived in New Jersey, but his birth mother, a young woman named June Nicholson, quietly traveled to New York so the people back home would not see what was happening. June was only about 17 or 18 years old. She was unmarried. The man who fathered the child was already married to someone else. In a small working-class town at that time, a scandal like that could destroy a family's name completely. So June's mother, a woman named Ethel May, made a decision that would cast a shadow over the next 4 decades of Jack's life. She registered herself as Jack's mother. She raised him as her own son. And she let the world believe that June was simply Jack's older sister. The lie went so deep that when Jack was 17 and needed official papers to travel to California, Ethel May filed a birth certificate that backed the whole story up. Jack had no reason to doubt any of it. As far as he knew, Ethel May was his mother and June was his sister. He believed that for almost 40 years. The home he grew up in was small and stretched thin. The man Jack believed was his father was actually his grandfather, a window dresser at a department store in New Jersey. Ethel May worked as a hairdresser. Her own childhood had been painful. She had been placed in foster care at the age of 6. Even the man Jack thought of as his grandfather had his own fractured history because he had been adopted too. So the strange and haunting truth of Jack's childhood was this. Almost no adult in that house had been raised by their own biological family. Everyone around him was already carrying old wounds and old silence. That gave the whole atmosphere a hidden weight that Jack could feel but could never quite name. By high school, that restless energy was showing itself in loud ways. His classmates in the 1954 yearbook voted him both class clown and best actor. 2 labels that said more about his future than anyone could have guessed. He was funny, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. He also spent nearly every single day of 1 full school year in detention. Years later he talked about it not with shame, but almost with pride, as if it proved he had no interest in bending himself to fit what other people expected. And all the while, he was unknowingly living inside a family lie that nobody had told him about yet. Then came the moment that could have broken almost anyone. In 1974, Jack Nicholson was 37 years old and already a rising name in Hollywood. A researcher from Time magazine called him while preparing a cover story and told him that Ethel May was not actually his mother and that June was not his sister. June was his real mother. He reached out to confirm it and was told it was true. The pain of that truth hit from every direction at once. June had already died of cancer in 1963. Ethel May had passed away in 1970. The 2 women who could have explained everything were both already gone. The truth had waited until it could no longer be answered. What is remarkable is how Nicholson handled it. He did not fall apart in public. He met it with a cool and steady calm. He said it was not something he would have chosen, but that he could handle the truth. He called it not traumatizing, because by that point he was already formed as a person. But the shape of that early deception is impossible to fully dismiss. The 2 most important women in his life had hidden their real identities from him his entire childhood. That kind of buried secret leaves marks on a person even when everything on the surface looks steady. And those marks showed up throughout his personal life for years, in the way he never married and in the way he kept his deepest self at a careful distance from almost everyone around him. Before any of that, though, he had to actually get to Hollywood. In 1955, at 18 years old, He moved from New Jersey to Los Angeles. His first job was not acting. It was at MGM's cartoon studio, running errands and carrying mail for the people behind Tom and Jerry. He was close enough to the entertainment world to feel it, but still far from the center. His real training came at the Players Ring Theater, where he studied under a teacher named Jeff Coy, who had been pushed out of his own acting career during the McCarthy blacklist era. Coy taught that a great actor had to absorb life deeply rather than simply fake emotion on command. That idea fit Nicholson perfectly. He was not polished in the traditional sense, but he could make a scene feel alive because he pulled from somewhere real inside himself. For years, though, none of that was enough to push him into the spotlight. By the mid-1960s, he was writing screenplays and co-producing films just to stay active. One project in 1968 brought him closer to producers Boat Schneider and Bob Rafelson, and it was Rafelson who would soon open the door that everything had been leading toward. In early 1969, Nicholson was 31 years old, had appeared in around 15 films, and still had almost no name recognition. He was not even supposed to be an easy rider. He was brought in mainly to keep an eye on the production. The role that made him famous only became available because actor Rip Torn had a violent argument with director Dennis Hopper and was dropped from the project. Nicholson stepped in and took the part of the drunken Southern lawyer George Hansen. What happened next did not feel gradual at all. Easy Rider became a cultural explosion, and Nicholson turned a supporting role into something unforgettable. In 1970, he received his first Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. It was the first of 12 nominations between 1970 and 2003, a number that tied the all-time record for a male actor. From there, the career became something very few actors in history can match. The Last Detail in 1973 showed a performance filled with heat and moral conflict. Chinatown in 1974 placed him at the center of one of the most celebrated films ever made, earning 11 Oscar nominations and later being added to the Library of Congress National Film Registry. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1975 swept all 5 major Oscar categories and gave Nicholson his first win for Best Actor. He had been smart enough to negotiate a share of the profits on that film instead of a flat fee, and that one decision reportedly earned him between $15 and $20 million from that single movie alone. He was no longer just a respected actor. He was a powerful figure who understood how to shape his own future. The Shining in 1980 pushed him into a different kind of legendary territory. The famous door scene reportedly required more than 130 takes and destroyed around 60 doors before director Stanley Kubrick was satisfied. Another scene set a Guinness World Record for the most retakes ever. Out of that punishing process came one of the most terrifying characters in film history. Then, in terms of endearment, in 1983 he played a lazy and charming retired astronaut and walked away with his second Oscar, this time for Best Supporting Actor. He had now won in 2 completely different emotional registers, which said everything about the range he carried. In 1989, he negotiated one of the smartest contracts any actor had ever made when he agreed to play the Joker in Batman. Warner Brothers offered him $10 million flat. He turned it down and instead accepted $6 million upfront plus a share of box office and merchandise revenue. Batman became a massive hit, and his total earnings from that one film reportedly climbed somewhere between $60 and $90 million. It changed how major stars negotiated with studios for years after. In A Few Good Men in 1992, he was paid $5 million for just 10 days of work. His total time on screen was roughly 15 minutes. He delivered the famous courtroom speech at full intensity around 40 to 50 times, so the crew could capture everyone's reaction shots. Then, when the director ran out of time, Nicholson came back for an extra morning of filming without charging another dollar. As Good as It Gets in 1997 brought him his 3rd acting Oscar at 60 years old. He took a man who could easily have felt unpleasant for 2 hours and made him deeply human. It was the work of an actor who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. But something was quietly changing. He was growing more selective with every passing year. He passed on major projects. He reportedly walked out of a Lord of the Rings screening and told the young stars backstage that it was simply too long. He did not return as Jack Torrance in the Doctor Sleep sequel. Stories circulated that he was setting his asking price high enough that studios could not realistically move forward, and that this suited him just fine. One producer who knew him well captured the mood in a single story. When asked about a film offer, Nicholson's answer had something to do with spending the afternoon under a tree reading a book. Work had stopped feeling urgent to him. His final film arrived without anyone realizing it would be the last. How Do You Know, released on December 17, 2010, was a romantic comedy from director James L. Brooks. Nicholson joined the project only after Bill Murray dropped out and was paid $12 million for a supporting role. The film failed badly and reportedly lost around $70 million. For a man who once made $60 million from Batman alone, it was a strange and quiet note to go out on. Yet that is exactly what happened. No farewell interview. No final red carpet moment. No announcement of any kind. The screen simply lost him. In 2013, he gave a brief interview to Vanity Fair, the closest thing to an explanation the public ever received. He said he was no longer driven to be out there anymore. He said the only films he cared about were ones that genuinely move people. And then he said something that hit differently than everything else. He said he no longer had the energy to both work and live the way he always had, and that during his final few films he had barely left the hotel room at night. For a man whose off-screen life had been part of the legend for decades, that felt like a window opening briefly before shutting again. Then came the rumor that struck closest to the bone. Reports claimed that Nicholson had stepped away because of serious memory loss and could no longer remember his lines well enough to work. The claim spread fast because it targeted the very thing that had made him who he was. His timing, his delivery, the way he could hold an entire scene just with the weight of how he said something. His team pushed back and a source said he was still reading scripts and was not dealing with any form of dementia. But the years passed and nothing came. That silence never fully answered the question it raised. In 2017, he was attached to an American remake of the German film Toni Erdmann, and for a time it genuinely looked like a comeback was coming. Then he dropped out and the production fell apart completely. Even after that, director James L. Brooks confirmed that Nicholson was still regularly reading scripts. That detail is quietly haunting. The door was never closed in words. It just never opened in real life. By the early 2020s, reports described him spending nearly all of his time inside his Mulholland Drive home. The same address that once symbolized Hollywood freedom and excess had become the line between him and the outside world. He had been a Lakers season ticket holder since 1970, and his courtside seat had become one of the most recognized spots in professional sports. After his last regular game appearance in October 2021, he disappeared from that scene as well. When he finally returned for a playoff game in April 2023, sitting beside his son Ray, people immediately noticed how much older and more fragile he looked. A few weeks later, he appeared once more during the Western Conference Finals, and that became one of the last times the public got a clear look at him. He was still there, still recognizably himself. But the man in those images looked very far from the figure who once owned that seat with a grin that could steal the camera from the entire arena. In January 2025, during the devastating Los Angeles wildfires, a moment emerged that told its own story more quietly than any interview could have. Angelica Huston, the woman he had been with for 17 years before their painful split, revealed that Nicholson had personally called her while she was evacuating and offered her his home on Mulholland Drive. Her description of that call was tender and shaken. After all those years, all that distance, he still reached for the phone when she needed someone. That single gesture said more about who Jack Nicholson truly is than anything from the previous decade combined. By mid-2025, whispers emerged that he might be open to one final role. Old friends and agents were said to be gently trying to draw him back. James L. Brooks confirmed once again that he was still reading scripts. But any return, if it ever happened, would have to fit the life he has now. No brutal early morning calls. No punishing schedules. None of the things the younger version of himself would have laughed off without thinking twice. And maybe that is the answer that was always there, waiting for us to see it. Jack Nicholson did not disappear because something broke inside him, though age and health almost certainly played their part. He disappeared because he had already done everything. 3 Oscars, 12 nominations, contracts that changed how Hollywood worked, performances that will still be studied 100 years from now. At some point, the hunger that drove all of it simply stopped demanding to be fed. The boy who once spent every day of a school year in detention because he refused to bend to what other people wanted had finally stopped bending to what the entertainment industry wanted from him too. And the name is not gone from the world. His son Ray Nicholson had a breakthrough role in Smile 2 in 2024, and audiences stopped cold when they saw that grin. There was something in it that felt familiar in a deep and almost startling way. Ray has spoken openly about acting as a kind of love language between himself and his father. Jack Nicholson may be mostly hidden now, but something of him is still in motion. And for a man who always played characters who burned bright and then pulled back before anyone could get too close, that might be exactly the kind of ending he would have written for himself.